before I introduce my esteemed panelists, I wanted to just do a quick bridge slide about platforms and payments. So when I think about payment products, a lot of times we think about payment products first. But what we should do is think about it in context of commerce. And commerce, of course, is evolving. So it's gone from physical commerce, where we went to the stores in person, to online, where we have the launch of Amazon, I can actually remember, in 1994, where we all went online. And then marketplaces came along with Alibaba in 1999. Social media came along in 2006. And social commerce really became popularized with WeChat in around 2011. So as you can see, things have really evolved. And then you get even more in depth with things like super apps and wallets, like Alipay, which have really taken off in Asia. And now we're moving into the next phase, which is the metaverse and Web3. So payment companies have been trying their best to kind of keep up with buying behavior, consumer behavior, and of course this is moving into B2B as well. And we are innovating at lightning speed. Now, one of the things that I've also noticed is this convergence between commerce and payments. And if you look at the commerce companies, they're all trying to embed payments into their journey. Think Uber with invisible payments. Think Amazon with their merchant lending. Think eBay with buy now, pay later services. And indeed, think Facebook with P2P payments through WhatsApp in Brazil or India. So you have all kinds of embedded payments being entered into this commerce journey. But also now, interestingly, you have fintech companies that are embedding commerce within fintech companies. And here, think about Klarna or PayPal or Revolut that are trying to bring commerce into the customer journey and indeed trying to become the super app of the West for tomorrow. So with that, and I'll just say one more thing. I love this book. First of all, I read the book a long time ago when it first came out. Thank you, Benoit and Laura, for giving us a comic book version as well. And I love the fact that Transact is one of the 5 key pillars, because without payments, you would not have any transactions on these platforms. So payments are absolutely critical. I think that Jeff Bezos really got that right when he recognized that without payments and without it being slick and smooth and frictionless, you're not going to have a successful marketplace or platform. So here's to my payments friends. Now I'd like to bring up my wonderful panel. So I'd like to Ez, Derren, and Mark, please come up and join me. Now, Ez, I didn't get to meet him until today, so I'm really pleased, but I've heard about you so many times. So Ez comes from the developer world. He's a founder of businesses. He's a serial entrepreneur. He went into the VC world, and then we're really excited to have him now as the CEO of CFIT. So CFIT he'll tell you a little bit more about that later, but yeah, CFIT is an exciting new organization I'm excited to partner with. And then we have Mark Shaw, who Mark and I go way back. I can't remember where we met, but I think we've crossed paths many times. He's a strategic thinker within many contexts, both LEK, some of the banks, payment companies like Visa, and now Spotify.
Jump the fence.
Yeah, absolutely. He's been on all sides of it. And last but not least, we have Derren Powell, who is the man that I go to for any questions I have about Mastercard, because Mastercard is a big company. It's a beast. And to really find your way around, this is the guy to know. He's responsible for fintechs and business development within UK and Ireland. So what I'd like to do today for our panel discussion, I'm going to ask each of them to tell us a little bit more about who they are, what they're doing, and also what their favorite platform is. Or if they can't say favorites, I know that we don't have, we don't have any favorite children, right? But maybe the platform that intrigues you the most. So we'll start with you as a little bit more about your role, and we're going to do a deep dive. After they do their intros, we'll do a little more of a deep dive into each one of them, and then I'll do some general panel discussions. But first, just a little bit about your role and the platform that most intrigues you.
Right, well, great to see you all, great to be here, and thank you so much. I'm Ezechi Britton, MBE, as we talked about earlier, or Ez, as most people know me. I'm the CEO of CFIT.
Do you have a special handshake for that?
We do, I can't show it to you.
You can't show me?
Sorry, that's not allowed. So I'm CEO for CFIT, the UK Centre for Finance, Innovation, Technology. We're an organisation that sits at that intersection between government and policy, the regulators, industry and academia, and our role is to bring everyone together in order to drive financial innovation forwards, and we do that through driving fintech strategy across the UK. Ultimately, what we do is we bring together time-bound coalitions of organisations from across the entirety of the UK financial services sector in order to solve some of those really difficult challenges that are preventing financial innovation in the UK.
Awesome.
Now, in terms of my favourite platform.
I didn't prepare them in advance. This is like, I want you to see some real off-the-cuff thinking here.
I'm a big gamer. So
You're a gamer, all right.
I grew up in the 80s. I love video games. So anything that enables me to do that. And ultimately, we talk about payments. I love the Nintendo Switch. And I spend a ridiculous amount of money on the Nintendo Play Store. And I think that's an incredible example of a platform that has become ubiquitous and been incredibly profitable whilst being completely under the radar in the same sense. And I use Spotify a lot. You do not want to see how often I listen to the Hamilton soundtrack. So that's me.
Awesome, thank you. And Mark, a little bit about your role with Spotify, and
yeah, sure. So
and you can't use your favorite platform as Spotify.
No,
pick something different.
But, I was going to throw it in there. But no, I lead global payment strategy for Spotify. So we operate a global payments platform across the 184 markets that we operate in. My role is predominantly looking at, kind of new technology, how do we adopt that, and how do we transition from, I guess, the one-way music service that we started at, selling subscriptions, to now this broad-based platform that supports subscriptions, ad-based services, as well as kind of, an increasing desire to, match together the users and the creators on our platform and allow new forms of value exchange between them. And so, yeah, as a payments team, we're trying to kind of figure out that journey and manage the kind of, the connection between Spotify as a platform and the wider payments ecosystem that allows us to kind of support those transactions.
Awesome. Again, you're the linchpin. Without you, there would be no transactions.
Me and a few others, but yeah.
Right.
And look, I guess my most used platform, I'd probably call out three. I mean, like as Spotify is on, kind of daily and, rack up thousands of hours doing that. And that goes across the whole family, across a whole host of devices. But two others that I just use, almost daily. So one is, I guess, the payment platforms. Every single day you make a Visa or a Mastercard transaction. And I think if you forget how powerful, that is. Today it's a tap of your phone. It's, incredible how far that has come and how far it reaches and what you can do with that. And so I'm always, I think amazed, and yes, I may be a payments bore to many people. But I think when people genuinely understand the power of that network, it is absolutely mind-blowing, really, as to kind of where it started and where it is today.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you. Derren, last but not least.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Derren. As Laura mentioned, I lead Mastercard's business development effort within the Fintech vertical for UK and Ireland. What that really means is two things. The first is working with and supporting, identifying all the plethora of fintechs that are out there and really have card issuance at their core. And obviously we're going to talk a lot more non-card today. But the reason I flagged that is because the power of partnerships, and something we'll talk about a little later, is what really enables that fintech ecosystem and environment to thrive. So that's my direct remit and that of my teams. Aligned to Laura's sort of opening point, I tried to be, and the team tried to be, the signpost within Mastercard to better connect people. You don't know what you don't know. And Mastercard obviously is a huge global environment. It's super complicated. It's a a massively diverse environment across the markets. So a big part of our role is to understand what people are looking for, to connect them optimally with relevant stakeholders and allow that conversation to happen with relevant subject matter experts.
Awesome, thank you. Excellent, and so now I'd like to just do a deeper dive. I think we're kind of lucky to have, again, CFIT here that's really working across the ecosystem and with the regulators and the politicians to some extent, if you can, and the companies. So it's an interesting angle. Let's do a little bit of a deep dive on CFIT. Can you tell us a little bit more about the history, why it came about?
Sure. So in 2021, the now famous Khalifa Review was commissioned by UK Treasury. And fundamentally, what that was about was looking into the state of play, the state of the nation for UK fintech. What was the prize on offer and what were the barriers to achieving that? And when they looked at the prize, it was really all about increased trade, increased jobs, increased inclusivity. But the key barriers, they identified five pillars, came down to ones that we're all no doubt familiar with. Regulatory challenge, access to scale capital, skills and talent, national connectivity, and international engagement and trade. So out of that came two key recommendations. One of them was the Fintech Growth Fund, which was to raise 50 billion from industry to invest in UK scale-ups. The other was to launch a Centre for Finance, Innovation and Technology. And I know the name just rolls off the tongue. I had nothing to do with the name. To be fair, I'm terrible at names. I would have called my cat Cat if I could get away with it. But, and its whole purpose was to really deliver on that Khalifa Review. Look at how we can enable national connectivity, bring all the different clusters of excellence in the fintech sector from around the UK together in order to maximise our usage of the relative skill sets. Look at what we could do around skills and talents from a national strategy perspective and start to bridge the gap between academia and business. Look at regulatory challenge and see how we can bring the regulators closer to industry. And fundamentally look at those broader macro challenges that the fintech sector faces and what could we do to actually solve for some of those and how could we almost create a coalition of the willing to really move the dial on some of these problems. So out of the back of that, the steering committee was then put together, which looked at how do we create an organisation like this. And out of that came CFIT. Charlotte Croswell came on as our chair at the beginning of this year. I came on as CEO in April, and we only launched at the end of February. So since February, we've gone from a concept in a report to a fully funded organisation. We're funded by HMT, so Treasury, to the tune of 5 million, and $500,000 from the City of London as well, to have a UK remit to really change the playing field, not just level it, but raise it for everybody. And so in that time, we've built the organisation, built the team, and we've created our first coalition already, which Mastercard are our newest member of. And there's over 50 organisations from across the entirety of the UK financial services industry tackling our first core coalition challenge around open finance. How can we go from open banking today to open finance tomorrow to open data in the future? And what are the benefits of doing this? Why is this good for the UK? Why is it good for the consumer? Why is it good for the SMEs? What does it do for us on a global standing? And the use case, what we decided was really around build a blueprint, show how we take this forwards, because we're all about the actions, not just policy recommendations, but what can we actually do as an industry to make change, working together to solve this problem in an independent yet commercially minded way. But then what are the key use cases that we can tackle to really bring this to life? And that first set of use cases very much around access to SME credit. And consumer financial awareness. So we're working with the lenders, we're working with the CRAs, we're working with the Citizens Advice Bureau to look at how we can use underutilised or unavailable data sets to boost credit scores and create greater access to financial awareness and inclusion and lending. And that really is just that first step on what does an open finance, open data, smart data future look like for the UK.
That's awesome. Very good. Thank you. Now, I just want a quick poll of the audience. How many of you all have heard about CFIT? Raise your hand.
That's just depressing.
That's right. It's a very new organization. It's a very new So what do you? So this group of people and people who are on the webinar, a lot of them are platform companies. So they're not going to be kind of close to us, but you're going to be working with platform companies.
Absolutely.
And how can you engage? How can CFIT engage with the platform companies? I'm talking the TikToks and the Metas and the Apples and Googles.
No, and I think that's a really good question, and I joke that it's depressing, but also it shows how much work there is still to do, and that's a really good thing for me. In terms of engagement, we've largely to date worked very closely with the various trade bodies and associations, mainly the Fintech associations, so your Fintechs North, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, West, Supertech, Innovate Finance, but also UK Finance, Open Finance Association, the ABI's Association of British Insurers. So we really have worked cross ecosystem to drive this type of engagement. And in terms of some of the platforms, we do have IBM, for example, massive platform provider as part of that coalition. So for me, it's a case of we're here, we're looking to build these coalitions. If you want to get involved, contact us and we can see how we can roll you in. This first coalition, Open Finance, next coalition will be on something else, Coalition 3 will be on something else again. I don't really want to commit to what that looks like just now, but we are looking at fintech centres, ecosystems, security. These are all the types of aspects that we're very focused on as we go forward. So for me, you want to get engaged, reach out. Everyone is welcome.
Awesome. And of course, that's why I brought you to meet with Mark from Spotify.
Absolutely.
You guys can work together after this.
Later.
Yes. And so Mark, now moving into Spotify a little bit. Now, I am fascinated by Spotify is such an amazing ecosystem. It's a great example of a platform company in that you're bringing together record labels and fans and independent artists, et cetera. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that ecosystem, that rich ecosystem, and how you help them to transact?
Yeah, for sure. It's quite interesting to kind of look back at Spotify's journey because it didn't start as a platform company. It started by licensing and bundling music and selling that in a very kind of linear business model. And then over time, we've built out into this platform that's kind of coincided with the growth. And we're now into probably, the kind of third evolution of that. So we went from selling, a bundled music subscription to then adding, what we know as freemium. So the free ad-supported service where there was clearly now a platform of network effects that the more users we brought to the system, the more attractive that was to advertisers. And now that we're at the scale we are of tens of millions of creators and over 500 million users, we're now starting to think about how, as a true audio platform, and amongst those creators, it's not just music, it's now podcasts. We've just launched audiobooks. So we have a huge, diverse set of creators, a global audience across 180 markets. We're now starting to really think through how do we enable that to become a true platform and enable fan-to-creator commerce, greater and deeper engagement across niche communities, fandom, some of these things that are really important. But also, how do we leverage, the scale that we have to bring new capabilities to, particularly our creators. So this morning, the guy at OpenAI mentioned the voice translation. That's just a great example where individually creators probably wouldn't have the technical capability or otherwise the access to build those sort of tools. We can build that and launch that to the entirety of our, for the benefit of the whole platform. So it's really interesting to look at the evolution of the business. But then from a payments perspective, we have to follow that evolution. And we then become just a participant in a set of other platforms. And so we have to manage those ecosystems and our role in those with the needs of our own platform. And so that's led us to, actually a kind of huge range of partners that we operate with, a huge range of different products, solutions, currencies, services, and challenges that we have to face. And I think to your, helpful kind of diagram at the start, we're almost kind of moving along that spectrum of starting to, think through basic embedded payments. And when we started out as a simple e-com company, to now supporting B2B payments, to embedding commerce, to even in the future starting to embed other financial services into that platform. So it's a really interesting juncture. It's super exciting to do that, but it's challenging to do at the scale that we are.
Awesome. And being a platform company, you have a lot of choices to make in terms of payments, whether to do it yourself or to partner. For example, you could get your own e-money license, or you could become a payment facilitator, or you could partner with those companies like Adyen or Stripe or PayPal, et cetera. What kind of recommendation would you give to other platforms in making these decisions?
Yeah, look, I think when you start out, partnering is the natural piece. Financial services comes with a heavy burden of regulation, and rightly so. And so naturally working with partners allows you to offboard a lot of that overhead. As you scale and grow, and particularly you think about embedding, those financial experiences deeper into your platform, the question of taking on a regulated status becomes more relevant. And I think what's great and what's so interesting about the payments and ecosystem is just the growth and the range and the dynamism of that partner space. We now operate with more than 40 different partners across the world, all of whom bring different things to our platform. I can only see that number growing. But at some point, to make that into a coherent user experience, we have to take on the burden of knitting some of those things together. There isn't a single partner that can operate at the global scale that we do. So inherently, we have to now start and build these things together, and increasingly that means we will start to take ownership of some of these things.
Awesome, thank you. So, Derren, as some of the platform companies look at getting into the payments services, but you also have some fintechs or some payments companies that want to work with the platform companies. So, what are the biggest opportunities that you see for some of your fintech clients in working with the platform companies?
Yeah, great shout. And first of all, thank you for not pressing me and putting me on the spot for my platform of choice.
Oh, wait.
No. It's all good. One of my favourite terms, and that of Mastercard, is that of agnosticity. So we'll leave that point there. I think in answer to your question, let's look at embedded finance first. I mean, the opportunity is huge, significant. I think one of the challenges was for us, maybe the definition of embedded finance is relatively simple. I think if you were to ask even this audience, say there's 50 people, I reckon we'd probably get 40 different responses and interpretations of what that truly means. I think from my perspective and that of Mastercard's, banking, payments and retail used to be extremely separate to one another. But I think we're seeing those sort of silos, verticals, whatever you want to call them, bridge together more and more to create greater value for consumers and the industry as a whole. I think when we talk about opportunity, it's also to try and recognise in order to do so successfully, there is a need for partnership. Ez has talked about it. Mark's acknowledged the power and the value of partnership. And I think there needs to be a level of willingness, intent and humility to accept what one's strength is versus what the strengths are of a partner who can maybe in the immediate term do that lift. And then it might be over time that, people start taking some of that, responsibility in-house and then start to own an increased level of that value chain. But I think it's about looking beyond what we may seem as, transactional resources and that willingness to collaborate. That ultimately forms a far more informed and holistic approach and viewpoint. We also need to think a little bit about that whole enablement piece, enabling the company to integrate banking and financial solutions in its infrastructure. Embedded finance has and will continue to transform the customer journey. I mean, the slides you referenced right at the start, how different does that look? And the time that elapsed really isn't that great. And that's one of the things that personally really excites me about the space we work in. The pace of innovation, the agility to pivot fast, to make decisions timely. And that's one of the things I absolutely admire around platforms like yourself. CFIT as an organisation, you see how that's going to evolve at real pace. And the acceleration within the fintech scene for me is something that I've never ever witnessed in any other industry. So again, these for me are all underpinning opportunities to the question that you raised. I think my sort of closing point really on this one is, fintech specifically will really benefit from integrating comprehensive digital solutions, and banks, as a result, can stay even closer to their customer base.
Awesome. And of course, fintechs are not without their challenges. And so I brought Ez here today to help you with any challenges you might have. Absolutely. So tell me, what's the big challenge for fintechs today?
I think the most obvious one is probably scale. You know, the reach, that ability and desire and intent to grow. You know, we talk a lot now. 2 years ago, the P word, profit, wasn't really talked about in the fintech space as much. I mean, now it's front and center, or at least a pathway to profitability. So it all links into that, you know, again, what your slide articulated, that seamless user journey, the potential for increased revenue, and looking at, you know, identifying other revenue streams. And you're seeing it in the fintechs, you know, again, how they're pivoting, they're looking at bringing in lending, they may be bringing in other forms of lending or form factors or products to their stack, which is ultimately giving them other opportunities and levers which they can pull. You know, let's be honest, growing a consumer base is hard, really hard, and costs a lot. I think the second point is really around exposure and expertise. You know, many of the fintechs we work with have wonderful ideas, like truly wonderful ideas. Could be very niche, very specific, but ultimately being able to channel that passion, energy, and leveraging and harnessing that talent to something that's market ready and can ultimately then scale and go beyond. You know, that's a key challenge. But I think, you know, when you start to get that blend right, it's going to work well for both consumers and the business.
Awesome, very good. Thank you. Well, that was a nice deep dive into each of these organizations. And now I just have a couple general questions. One, as you all know, Jeremy Hunt, I think it was back in July the 10th, he did a speech at Mansion House where he talked about really trying to make the UK even more successful in financial services and pensions and fintech and payments. And he commissioned this report under Joe Gardner to try and figure out how are we doing in the UK vis-a-vis the rest of the world. How are we doing in terms of payments? So that's something that he's been working on. He's been working with a lot of different platform companies and banks and payment companies. But I'd like to get your guys' take. You know, where are we ahead of the game? And where are we falling behind? And let's just be honest with ourselves here, because we're not always leading the pack on everything.
So,
kick off.
No, I'll talk to elements, and I'm not a payments expert, right? I've spent a lot of time in the fintech space as a fintech co-founder. You know, we were on the online lending side of things, and we raised over 200 million, and then hit the walls of some of the barriers that we talk about. And I've been a VC investor. You know, we've invested in fintech unicorns, but on the insurance side, and we input to the Joe Gardner review as well, particularly around the potential of open banking to payments and how that's a direction of travel that we should be focused on. And that's something that we need to really unlock. And I think something where we are world leading is on account-to-account payments, and it is astonishing the flexibility that enables for fintechs to bring in new payment rails and new ways of business. I've got a portfolio company, which I won't name because I try not to be, you know, I've got to be very careful in these spaces. But they were able to bring in account-to-account payments in a matter of weeks, which then facilitated their clients to actually dramatically reduce their cost of transacting on the platform, and they're now looking to expand into North America. So it's astonishing what we're able to achieve through that, but it doesn't go far enough. There are still a lot of challenges with account-to-account payments, whether it's refunds, whether it's fraud, whether it's failures, right? Error codes. There's so many different things we should look at. But for me, I think that's an area where we're really driving innovation forwards, and that's why, again, we can talk about data from so many different angles, but that's why for us this first coalition on open finance is so important, because it's about putting in place those building blocks that really do enable the UK to be a world leader in fintech. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'd maybe challenge that a little bit. I think in many ways the UK it's at the forefront of I guess payments innovation and payments development. I think by many metrics it is one of certainly the top 10 most penetrated markets in terms of digital payment usage, in terms of access to a variety of payment methods. You know, the robustness of our infrastructure. And so in many ways, the UK is industry leading. But I think actually looking at things like real-time payments and things, we've actually been painfully slow. You know, the regulator kicked us in the right direction, but you compare that with the growth of things like UPI in India or PIX in Brazil, clearly starting from a different starting point. You know, much less existence of alternative, well-functioning solutions. But we've been painfully slow. We've been talking about open banking payments for 6-7 years, and per capita, it's fractional, it's tiny. But I think one of the things the UK does lead on versus the rest of the world is, and you know, we heard from Competition and Markets Authority this morning, is the regulatory approach to you know, payments. You know, between the Bank of England, between the FCA and the Sandbox, we have a dedicated payments regulator. We have the CMA looking at things like DMCC and access to these sorts of things. These are really important things because I think you look back, big transitional moments in payments are often instigated by government and regulators. They provide step changes in platforms and infrastructures that allow fintechs to then thrive and to build new solutions for end users like us. They open up access. You know, we've got more non-bank access to financial infrastructure here in the UK than many other markets. So we have some, you know, structural advantages, but I think our speed of change is relatively slow compared to some other markets. And, you know, there are forces, I think, constraining that. You know, there are big platforms that now have very influential, you know, control over some of these things. You know, take Spotify. You know, our principal point of interaction with our user is the app. We cannot sell to our users in the app. This is 2023. That's madness. We can't even tell our user where they can go and buy our service. This is 2023. That's madness. So there are still structural barriers, I think, when you look right the way from deep in the payments infrastructure, through the banking, through regulation, that we have to unlock, I think, for innovation to thrive.
Yeah, I acknowledge all those points, and I think, you know, that said, I still firmly believe that the UK payments industry is absolutely world leading. You know, when we think of, you know, paving the way for innovation, partnerships, adoption, you know, you acknowledge the account-to-account piece. I think that's interesting. You know, obviously from a Mastercard perspective, we've got VocaLink within our stable. You know, that gives us real time, you know, faster payments, obviously from a UK perspective, and similarly within our transfer solution stable, account-to-account, you know, provisioning. I think for me, it also, you know, when you look at that pace in terms of digital payment acceleration, and we can use the pandemic as a bit of a reference point, you know, when we look at the impact, the positive impact, and I always feel awkward saying the positive impact during the pandemic, but the impact that had on simple things like contactless, right, and adoption, and the use of wallets, and people's education within sort of that environment, I think it's you know, it's achieved far more in that sort of 24-month window than what it's probably done in 60 months. That said, you know, there's continued, you know, innovation from a customer's perspective, consumer's perspective, where they're embracing new forms. You know, you think wearables, buy now, pay later, biometrics. You know, I think I was talking to earlier on was talking about AI and the role that can have. But I think, you know, it's important that we as Mastercard and we as a community work with players across that ecosystem to ultimately enable and provide choice.
Awesome. Now I'm going to challenge this a little bit. There are some interesting payment companies like Alipay and WeChat Pay in Asia that have created this whole super app concept where you have you know, you're layering on a wallet with ID, with identity, with networks, and then layering all kinds of commerce on top of that. And then now Elon Musk. We've all been reading about how Elon Musk is going to turn X, aka Twitter, into a super app, and we're no longer going to need bank accounts. So you've got that happening in the US, you've got the Asia phenomenon. A lot of people say it's just not going to happen here. Do you think that super apps ever have a future in the West?
So on that, some really good points previously, and I think there's some really interesting bills going through Parliament at the moment, from the DPDI bill to the FSMA to the ETDA that did go through earlier on in the year. They're really all about setting up the environment for us to regulate effectively so that we can put in place secondary legislation so that we can drive some of these activities forwards. Because you touched on something, it was very fleeting, but it's absolutely critical to a lot of these systems, and that's identity, right? And until we can sort that particular problem out, it is really hard to drive for some of these solutions. And that's probably, for me, that's one of the things that's really been missing in the UK. We can have all these digital solutions, fantastic. But when it still comes to it, and you want to set up a bank account, or you want to do this, you want to do that, and the request is, well, can I have a scan of your passport, please? And now I'm going to send it off to some company in Mexico who will give some housewife an opportunity to have a look at it and send it back. Yes, that's the right person. All right, great, we can move forwards. That's a real problem for our system. And we talk about the future of platforms. I personally believe the digital wallet will be the future of our core platforms, and that can be on whatever form factor you like. But you have a digital wallet with some form of mandated ID, whether it's government, whether it comes from the bank, payment system, whatever it might be. And then ultimately that wallet hooks into all the various APIs for you, and all that happens is someone makes a request to your wallet and says, we want to enable X, can we have permission to? You can say yes, you can say it's time bound, you can revoke it, and then that drives what then happens off the back of that. Then you can have your digital assistants, and everything flows from that starting point. And that's where we're very quickly moving to, I'd say, over the next 18 to 24 months.
Thank you, because that is so important. I mean, for all the platform companies out there, trust. I've done some research. Back when I was at Cenit, we did a lot of research on social commerce, and the biggest barrier was trust. And that is that people are afraid to buy things from each other on a platform when they don't know, is this identity real? Has someone hacked my granddaughter's profile and is asking me for money? These things happen all the time, and apparently over 80% of fraud APP fraud is actually coming through some sort of social media. So we need to get better at identity to create trust within the system.
I think linked to that point, right? We talk a lot about trust, so important. But we've also got to understand within this super app question, how do we continue to place a focus on those that are marginalised, those that are vulnerable? Applying that DEI lens, and those that are underserved, they could quite quickly get lost, right? And I think that's something we need to be cognizant of. The word super app and my role on a day-to-day, the two don't really mesh, right? Because we're looking for those fintechs want to be, whether it's a part of directly, indirectly, whatever it may be. Ultimately, they're at the opposite end of that spectrum. But I think the one thing for us, from a Mastercard perspective, is clear that the future of commerce is absolutely being shaped by an intersection of new technologies and assets that are uniquely digital.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think the one thing I'd add to this, and I mean, I've had this debate a number of times. I think in the West, we're at a point where we have so many large-scale established platforms that it's very difficult, I think, to envision that true super app. Uber is not going to give up their audience and their network because that's the value of their platform. They're not then going to partner and open that up to somebody else, or at least not within, reasonable realms. And so I think it's very difficult to imagine a path to a genuine WeChat-type super app. But I think what you're seeing with the embedding of finance and commerce into these platforms is the intent to make that experience as seamless as possible in those given environments. But in doing so, we're onboarding and we're overlapping these different platforms, and we're defraying a lot of this trust. We rely that a user presenting a Mastercard, that's a trustworthy user. That user paying us or potentially paying a creator on our platform, they're relying on Spotify having done their due diligence. And so this under-reliance on trust and being able to identify your participants, it's really key. And in our business, that's changed quite significantly as we've gone from, heavily licensed content of music where there are other people who've done that due diligence, to podcasts that's an open ecosystem. I can start a podcast in my garage, upload it to Spotify tomorrow, talk about whatever I want to. We now serve ads against that. We might start allowing users to buy bespoke access to that. What's now the platform responsibility in moderating, behaviors, in, extending trust both in and out of the platform? I think it's really interesting, and it's one where the super app concept just wraps all of that in one place. It puts a boundary. We have many, many overlapping boundaries, and you have different platforms and groups then taking different decisions about that. The App Store is a great example, right? It's only about 3% of developers that are asked to use the App Store payments. The other 97, Apple says it's fine. Go ahead, do what you want. Well, on what basis are those judgment calls being made and these sorts of things? So it's where these platforms overlap that you get these points of friction. And those points of friction then create, whether it be fraud, whether it be bad user experience, whether it be a barrier to innovation. And I think that's quite a big difference to where we are in the West versus how things have grown up in the East.
And just on that, I asked the question, do we want a super app? Do we need it? I mean, we've got all these great platforms. Is it just that we need them to be able to communicate effectively? I use Zipcar a lot, and I have Ringo, the parking app. Now, Ringo is really interesting because it tells you register your vehicle before you park. But every time I use Zipcar, I get a different vehicle. So I have to go to a parking location. What's the car that I've got? Anyone know? What's the license number? Why aren't they just talking to each other? I mean, there's a really simple solution to this problem. The APIs almost certainly exist. So I think really it is about interconnectivity, APIs, and again, that digital identity piece further enables this. But we need to see that level of communication between systems, and that might be a regulatory hurdle and challenge. We work very closely with the FCA, for example. But there are solutions to these problems.
Yeah, so maybe we won't go the route of WeChat Pay and have one big super app, but there might be some niche super apps or some verticals, and kind of it's all about the stack, having that identity, the wallet, the commerce, kind of working with each other in concert.
But isn't there a thought or a consideration to the interconnectivity that you talk about? Yeah, maybe we will reach the masses, but as a result of reaching the masses, do we not overlook potentially some of those are unique and smaller groups, SME, micro business, giggers, creators? I don't know, something to think about. There's a place for that. I think you acknowledge that point, Mark.
Yeah, and I think that's the role for platforms in some extent, and there's kind of benefits and trade-offs around these things. But platforms can allow. I met in Money 2020 in Vegas last year a platform supporting barbershops. We talked about some of the healthcare examples today. The reach and the kind of technology can then be brought to users, SMEs who wouldn't otherwise do that. Can provide protection to marginalized users in a way that traditional businesses may not. I think there is a role for platforms to kind of play in that space and to democratize some of these these new technologies and things in a way that perhaps in the past we couldn't.
And the most important thing is for us to work together.
Right.
So
Partnerships.
Partnerships,
yes, absolutely. That's why I brought these three people together. And I think I've only gotten through my second question on the list. And we are out of time. So I'm going to ask real quickly, are there any burning questions from the audience right now? Because I think we're done, yeah?
Time for
one or two questions.
First of all, apologies, I didn't know about CFIT, but now I will not stop asking questions.
Oh, man.
The very important point of digital identity. I have a secondary one for you. This is about the asymmetrical relationship during a call from a bank or a supplier to a customer. And they ask you, prove me your identity.
Right.
They call you, but they want you to prove your identity, they don't prove their identity. Is there a solution or a problematic behind this in a more symmetrical relationship?
Well, I think there's such a great question around prove your identity. And it comes back to, I think there's a key difference between identification and verification, right? And Great example, you do a Zoom call, you see a video of the other person on the other end. That could be a clone, an AI image of someone else's voice. I actually don't really want to know anything about that person. I don't need to know their date of birth. I don't want to know what their mother's maiden name is. I don't know what their first pet was. It's irrelevant to me, right? What I do want to verify is this the right person that I'm speaking to, regardless of what filter you might have. You know, you can make yourself look like a cat, like that guy did in that judge, if you really want to, but that's not what's relevant. And I think it's important that the person contacting me verifies themselves as well. And we see this with payment challenges, you know, and with, again, you know, APP, fraud and arrest. Do I know who I'm paying, and do I know who's requesting me to pay? And that's absolutely critical. And there are technical solutions towards doing this, but again, you do need that verified identity so that you can provide the appropriate credentials that say, I am this individual. You don't need to know anything more than me, about me, other than the fact that my credentials verify that I am who I say I am. And I think that can come down to a two-way handshake. And as we use more and more digital platforms, it's something that should be happening as we go forwards. And again, this is something that, you know, I'm not a policy person, but if we look at what's happening with the DPDI bill, we look at what's happening with the City of London and their road to economic growth, there's a very, very strong focus now on pushing forwards the digital verification agenda, which I think is a good thing.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.